When the ladies in the city had maliciously gossiped about her, Zuleika had invited them all to a banquet. She gave each of them a knife, and she said to Joseph, "Come out before them." When they saw him, they did extol him, and in their amazement cut their hands. They said, "God preserve us. No mortal is this. This is none other than a noble angel." Who could blame Zuleika for desiring Joseph so much? "How do I look?" Kimya asked anxiously before she put on her veil, ready to step out the door and onto the street. "You look exquisite," I said. "Your husband will not only make love to you tonight, he'll come back tomorrow asking for more." Kimya blushed so hard her cheeks turned rosy red. I laughed, and after a brief pause she joined me, her laughter warming me like sunshine. I meant what I'd said, as I felt confident that she would be able to attract Shams, the way a flower rich with nectar attracts a bee. And yet when our eyes met just before she opened the door, I saw that a trace of doubt had crept into her gaze. Suddenly I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, almost a premonition that something terrible was going to happen. But I didn't stop her. I should have known better. I should have seen it coming. For as long as I live, I will never forgive myself. Kimya Konya, December 1247. Bold, boisterous, and intelligent, Shams of Tabriz knows a great deal about love. But there is one thing he doesn't know anything about: the pain of unrequited love. The evening desert rose dressed me. I was full of excitement and an audacity I didn't know I had in me. The soft rustle of the silk dress against my body, the scent of my perfume, the taste of rose petals on my tongue, it all made me feel awkward, but also unusually brave. Back at home I caught my reflection on a pane of glass. My body was neither rotund nor milky, and my bosom not as ample as I would have liked, but I still thought I looked pretty. I waited until I was sure everyone in the house had gone to sleep. Then I wrapped myself in a long, thick shawl and tiptoed to Shams's room. "Kimya, I wasn't expecting you," he said as soon as he opened his door. "I had to see you," I said and stepped inside without waiting for him to invite me in. "Could you please close the door?" Shams looked puzzled, but he did as told. When we were alone in the room, it took me a few seconds to muster my courage. I turned my back to him, took a deep breath, and then, in one quick move, removed my shawl and slid my robe off. Almost instantly I felt the weight of my husband's surprised eyes on my back, from my neck down to my feet. Wherever his gaze touched felt warm. But that warmth, whether it was real or imagined in my excitement, was quickly replaced by the coldness of the silence that descended upon the room. My chest rising and falling with apprehension, I stood in front of Shams as naked and inviting as the houris in paradise are said to be. In the pregnant silence, we stood listening to the wind outside, howling, raging, and wailing through the city. "What do you think you are doing?" he asked coldly. It was quite an effort to find my voice, but I managed to say, "I want you." Shams of Tabriz walked a half circle around me and stood right in front of me, forcing me to look him in the eye. My knees buckled beneath me, but I didn't budge. Instead I took a step toward him and pressed my body against his, squirming ever so slightly, offering him my warmth, the way Desert Rose had taught me. I caressed his chest and whispered soft words of love. I drank in his fragrance as I moved my fingers up and down his muscular back. As if he had touched a burning stove, Shams jerked away. "You think you want me, you think you do, but all you want is to pamper your bruised ego." I put my arms around his neck and kissed him, ever so hard. I pushed my tongue into his mouth and began flicking it back and forth, as I remembered what Desert Rose had told me: men love to suck their wives' tongues, Kimya. They all do. His lips tasted like blackberries, sweet and sour, but just as quickly as I thought a swirl of pleasure pulled us together, Shams stopped me and pushed me away. "I am disappointed in you, Kimya," Shams said. "Now, could you please get out of my room?" As harsh as his words sounded, not a trace of feeling grazed his face. No anger, not even the slightest irritation. And I couldn't tell which hurt me the most, the sharpness of his words or the blankness on his face. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. I bent down to take my robe, but my hands were trembling so hard I couldn't hold the slippery, delicate fabric. Instead I grabbed my shawl and wrapped it around myself. Sobbing, gasping, and still half naked, I ran out of the room and away from him, away from this love that I now understood existed only in my imagination. I never saw Shams again. After that day I never left my room. I spent all my time lying on my bed, lacking not so much the energy as the will to go out. A week passed, then another, and then I stopped counting the days. All strength was drained from my body, ebbing away bit by bit. Only my palms felt alive. They remembered the feel of Shams's hands and the warmth of his skin. I never knew that death had a smell. A strong odor, like pickled ginger and broken pine needles, pungent and bitter, but not necessarily bad. I came to know it only when it started to waft around my room, enveloping me like thick, wet fog. I started running a high fever, slipping into delirium. People came to see me. Neighbors and friends. Kara waited by one side of my bed, her eyes swollen, her face ashen. Gever stood on the other side, smiling her soft, dimpled smile. "Goddamn that heretic," said Sophia. "This poor girl has fallen sick of heartbreak. All because of him." I tried to force a sound, but it didn't make it past my throat. "How can you say such things? Is he God?" Kara said, trying to help. "How can you attribute such powers to a mortal man?" But they didn't listen to Kara, and I was in no state to convince anyone of anything. In any case, I soon realized that whatever I said or didn't say, the outcome would be much the same. People who didn't like Shams had found another reason in my illness to hate him, whereas I could not dislike him even if I wanted to. Before long I drifted into a state of nothingness, where all colors melted into white and all sounds dissolved into a perpetual drone. I could not distinguish people's faces anymore and could not hear spoken words beyond a distant hum in the background. I don't know if Shams of Tabriz ever came to my room to see me. Perhaps he never did. Perhaps he wanted to see me but the women in the room would not let him in. Or perhaps he did come after all, and sat by my bed, played me the knave for hours, held my hand, and prayed for my soul. I'd like to believe that. Nonetheless, one way or the other, it didn't matter anymore. I was neither angry nor cross with him. How could I be, when I was flowing in a stream of pure awareness? There was so much kindness and compassion in God and an explanation for everything. A perfect system of love behind it all. 10 days after I visited Shams's room clad in silk and perfumed tools, 10 days after I fell ill, I plunged into a river of pure non-existence. There I swam to my heart's content, finally sensing that this must be what the deepest reading of the Quran feels like, a drop in infinity. And it was flowing waters that carried me from life to death. Ella, Boston, July 3, 2008. Boston had never been this colorful and vibrant, Ella thought. Had she been blind to the city's beauty all this time? Aziz spent 5 days in Boston. Every day Ella drove from Northampton to Boston to see him. They had tasty, modest lunches in Little Italy, visited the Museum of Fine Arts, took long walks on Boston Common and the waterfront, watched the whales in the aquarium, and had coffee after coffee in the busy, small cafes of Harvard Square. They talked endlessly on subjects as diverse as the curiosities of local cuisines, different meditation techniques, Aboriginal art, Gothic novels, bird watching, gardening, growing perfect tomatoes, and the interpretation of dreams, constantly interrupting and completing each other's sentences. Ella didn't remember ever talking so much with anyone. When they were outside on the street, they took care not to touch each other, but that proved to get increasingly difficult. Small peccadillos became exciting, and Ella started looking forward to a brush of their hands. Goaded by a strange courage she never knew she had in her, in restaurants and on the streets Ella held Aziz's hand, kissed his lips. Not only did she not mind being seen, it felt as if a part of her longed to be seen. Several times they returned to the hotel together, and on each occasion they came very close to making love, but they never did. The morning of the day Aziz was going to fly back to Amsterdam, they were in his room, his suitcase standing between them like a nasty reminder of the parting to come. "There's something I need to tell you," Ella said. "I've been thinking about this for too long." Aziz raised one eyebrow, acknowledging the sudden shift in Ella's tone. Then he said carefully, "There's something I need to tell you, too." "Okay. You go first." "No, you go first." Still smiling her half-smile, Ella lowered her gaze, contemplating what to say and how to say it. Finally she started. "Before you came to Boston, David and I went out one evening and had a long talk. He asked me about you. Apparently he read our emails without my knowledge. I was incredibly angry at him for that, but I didn't deny the truth. About us, I mean. Now Ella raised her eyes with apprehension to see how Aziz would react to what she was about to reveal. To make a long story short, I told my husband that I loved another man. Outside on the street, the sirens of several fire trucks broke the usual sounds of the city. Ella was distracted momentarily, but then she was able to finish. It sounds crazy, I know, but I've been thinking this over very carefully. I want to come with you to Amsterdam. Aziz walked to the window and looked down at the hurrying and bustle outside. There was smoke coming out of one of the buildings in the distance, a thick black cloud hovering in the air. He silently prayed for the people who lived there. When he started to speak, it sounded as if he were addressing the entire city. I would love to take you to Amsterdam with me, but I cannot promise you a future there. What do you mean? Ella asked nervously. At this, Aziz walked back, sat by her side, put his hand on hers, and as he caressed it absent-mindedly, said, "When you first wrote to me, it happened to be a very strange time in my life." You mean there is someone else in your life? No, sweetheart, no. Aziz smiled a little, and then the smile faded. It's nothing like that. I once wrote to you about the 3 stages in my life, remember? Those were the first 3 letters in the word, Sufi. You never asked me about the 4th stage, and hard as I tried, I couldn't bring myself to tell you. My encounter with the letter I. Would you like to listen to it now? Yes, Ella said, although she feared anything and everything that could disrupt this moment. Yes, I would. In a hotel room on that day in July, a few hours prior to his flight back to Amsterdam, Aziz told Ella how he had become a Sufi in 1977, adopting a new name for himself and also, as he had hoped, a new destiny. Ever since then he had traveled the world as a photographer by profession, a wandering dervish at heart. He had made close friends on 6 continents, people who saw him as part of their family. Though he hadn't married again, he had become the foster father of 2 orphans in Eastern Europe. Never taking off the necklace in the shape of the sun that he wore to remind him of Shams of Tabriz, Aziz had lived life by traveling, reading, and teaching in the footsteps of Sufi dervishes, encountering signs of God everywhere and in everything. Then, 2 years ago, he learned about his sickness. It started with a lump in his armpit, which apparently he was late to notice. The lump turned out to be a malignant melanoma, a fatal form of skin cancer. The doctors said it didn't look good, but they had to run several tests before giving him a more definite diagnosis. A week later they returned with bad news. The melanoma had spread to his internal organs and invaded his lungs. At the time he was 52. He was told he would not make it past 55. Ella moved her lips to say something, but the words did not come out and her mouth felt bone dry. 2 tears rolled down her cheeks, which she quickly wiped off. Aziz kept speaking, his tone firm and urgent. He said thus commenced a new, and in some ways a more productive, phase in his life. There were still places he wanted to see, and the first thing he did was find a way to get to them all. He established a Sufi foundation in Amsterdam with worldwide connections. As an amateur ney player, he gave concerts with Sufi musicians in Indonesia, Pakistan, and Egypt, and even made an album with a group of Jewish and Muslim mystics in Córdoba, Spain. He went back to Morocco and visited the lodge where he had met real Sufis for the first time in his life. Master Samid was long dead, and Aziz prayed and meditated by his grave, contemplating on the trajectory his life had followed. Then I retreated to write the novel I had always wanted to write but, in my laziness or lack of courage, had postponed endlessly, said Aziz with a wink. You know, it was one of those things I had wanted to do for a long time. I named the book Sweet Blasphemy and sent it to a literary agency in America, not expecting much and at the same time feeling open to all possibilities. A week later I received an intriguing email from a mystery woman in Boston. Ella couldn't help but smile. A weak smile of respectful compassion, tender and pained. Aziz said ever since that moment nothing had been the same. From a man getting ready to die, he had turned into a man falling in love at a most unexpected time. Suddenly all the pieces that he thought he'd long ago put into place had to be moved. Spirituality, life, family, mortality, faith, and love, he found himself rethinking their meanings again and not wanting to die. This new and final stage of his life he called his encounter with the letter I in the word, Sufi. And he said so far this stage had proved to be much more difficult than all the earlier ones, because it had come at a time when he thought he'd worked through most, if not all, of his inner conflicts, a time when he thought he was spiritually mature and fulfilled. In Sufism you learn how to die before death. I have gone through each of those stages, step by step. Then, just when I start to think I've got it all neatly sorted, here comes this woman out of nowhere. She writes to me, and I write back. After each email I start waiting for her answer with bated breath. Words become more precious than ever. The whole world turns into a blank screen, waiting to be written upon. And I realize I want to get to know this person. I need more time with her. Suddenly my life is not enough anymore. I realize I am scared of death, and one part of me is ready to rebel against the God I have revered and submitted to. But we will have time, Ella said when she found her voice. My doctors tell me I have 16 months, Aziz said, lightly but firmly. They might be wrong, or they might be right. I cannot know. You see, Ella, all I can give you is the present moment. That is all I have. But the truth is, no one has more than that. It is just that we like to pretend we do. Ella peered down at her feet, leaning sideways, as if part of her were about to fall down and part of her resisted. She started to cry. Don't, please. I wanted you to come with me to Amsterdam more than anything. I wanted to say, let's travel the world together. Let's see distant lands, get to know other people and admire God's composition together. That would be nice, Ella said sniffing, like a child offered some bright-colored toy in the midst of her wailing. Aziz's face darkened. He looked away from her toward the window. But I was afraid to ask you. I was even afraid to touch you, let alone make love. How could I ask you to be with me and abandon your family when I had no future to offer you? Cringing at his question, Ella said, why are we being so pessimistic? You can fight this illness. You can do it for me. For us. Why do we have to fight everything? Aziz wanted to know. We're always talking about fighting inflation, fighting AIDS, fighting cancer, fighting corruption, fighting terrorism, even fighting extra pounds. Don't we have any other way of dealing with things? I'm not a Sufi, Ella croaked impatiently, her voice sounding like the voice of someone else, someone older. At that moment many thoughts crossed her mind. The death of her father, the pain of losing a loved one to suicide, the years and years of resentment and regret that followed, sifting through every little bit of memory of the one who is dead, wondering if things could have been any different had those details been shuffled differently somewhere. I know you're not a Sufi. Aziz smiled. And you don't have to be one. Just be Rumi. That's all I'm asking of you. What do you mean? She asked. Some time ago you asked me if I was Shams, remember? You said I reminded you of him. As happy as I was to hear that, I cannot be Shams. I think he was way beyond and above me. But you can be Rumi. If you let love take hold of you and change you, at first through its presence, then through its absence. I'm not a poet, Ella said this time. Rumi wasn't a poet either. But he was transformed into one. Don't you get it? I'm just a housewife, for God's sake, a mother of 3, Ella exclaimed, breathing in huge gulps. We're all what we are, murmured Aziz. And we're all subject to change. It is a journey from here to there. You can make that journey. And if you are brave enough and if I am brave enough, we can go to Konya together in the end. That is where I want to die. Ella gasped. Stop talking like that. Aziz watched her for a moment, and then his eyes dropped. There was a new expression on his face now, a distance in his tone, as if he were swiftly drifting away, like a dry leaf at the mercy of the wind. Or else, he said slowly, go home, Ella. Go back to your children and your house. You decide, love, whatever you choose, I will respect your decision and I will love you till the end. Suleiman the Drunk Konya. March 1248 Blood, sweat, and tears. Outsiders think drinkers are lazy people who have nothing else to do. Little do they know that drinking increasing amounts of wine every day requires a lot of effort. We carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. Tired and petulant, I was dozing with my head on the table, having a not so pleasant dream. There was a big, black bull, angry as hell, chasing me on unfamiliar streets. I ran away from the animal without a clue as to what I had done wrong to stir him up, knocking over stalls and smashing merchandise, drawing the anger of all the vendors in the bazaar. Still running, I entered a thoroughfare that turned out to be a dead-end street. And there I bumped into a mammoth egg, bigger than a house. Suddenly the egg started to hatch, and out came the ugliest baby bird ever, wet and noisy. I tried to get out of the street, but the mother bird appeared in the sky, glaring down at me as if I had been responsible for the ugliness of her baby. Just as the bird began to descend, its sharp beak and even sharper claws pointed at me, I woke up. I opened my eyes and realized that I had fallen asleep on a table by the window. Though my mouth tasted like rusty nails and I was dying to have a drink, I felt too tired to even move. So I kept resting my heavy head on the table, sinking ever deeper into my stupor and listening to the usual sounds in the tavern. I heard a heated argument rising and falling like the buzz of swarming bees. It came from the men sitting at the next table, and though I briefly considered the possibility of turning my head to see who they were, I did not move a muscle. And that is when I overheard that ominous word, murder. At first I dismissed their talk as drunken ravings. One hears all sorts of things in a tavern and in time learns not to take every spoken word seriously. But there was something in their tone too menacing and potent to disregard, so I pricked my ears and listened. My jaw dropped open when it finally dawned upon me that they were serious. But even deeper was my shock when I understood who it was that they wanted to kill, Shams of Tabriz. As soon as they left the table, I stopped feigning sleep and jumped to my feet. "Haristus, come here, be quick," I yelled in panic. "What is it this time?" Haristus came running. "Why are you so distressed?" But I couldn't tell, not even him. All of a sudden, everyone looked suspicious. What if there were more people involved in this conspiracy against Shams? I had to keep my mouth shut and my eyes wide open. "Nothing. I'm hungry, that's all," I said. "Could you please bring me some soup? Make it with a lot of garlic. I need to sober up." Haristus stared at me quizzically, but, being used to my moodiness, he did not ask me any more questions. In a few minutes, he brought me a bowl of goat intestine soup, spicy and scorching, which I ate in haste, my tongue burning. Having sobered up sufficiently, I dashed into the street to warn Shams of Tabriz. First I tried Rumi's house. He wasn't there. Then I went to the mosque, the madrasa, the tea house, the bakery, the hammam. I looked in every store and cellar on the street of artisans. I even checked the old gypsy woman's tent among the ruins, in case he had gone there to get rid of a sore tooth or a bad spell. I looked for him everywhere, my anxiety growing with every passing minute. Fear began to gnaw at me. What if it was too late? What if they had already killed him? Hours later, not knowing where else to look, I made my way back to the tavern, downhearted and exhausted. And just like magic, only a few steps away from the tavern door, I bumped right into him. "Hello, Suleiman, you look preoccupied," Shams said, smiling. "Oh, my God, you're alive," I exclaimed, and ran to his arms. When he managed to pull away from my embrace, Shams stared at me, looking quite amused. "Of course I'm alive. Do I look like a ghost to you?" I smiled, but not for long. My head ached so much that at any other time I would have downed a few bottles to get drunk as quickly as possible and doze off. "What is it, my friend? Is everything all right?" Shams asked suspiciously. I swallowed hard. What if he didn't believe me when I told him about the plot? What if he thought I'd been hallucinating under the influence of wine? And perhaps I was. Even I couldn't be sure. "They're planning to kill you," I said. "I have no idea who they are. I couldn't see their faces. You see, I was sleeping. But I didn't dream this. I mean, I did have a dream, but it wasn't like this. And I wasn't drunk. Well, I had drunk a few glasses, but I wasn't." Shams put his hand on my shoulder. "Calm down, my friend. I understand. You do, yes. Now, go back to the tavern, and don't you worry about me." No, I'm not going anywhere. "And neither are you," I objected. "These people are serious. You need to be careful. You cannot go back to Rumi's house. That is the first place they will look for you." Oblivious to my panic, Shams stayed silent. "Listen, Dervish, my house is small and a bit stuffy. But if you don't mind that, you can stay with me as long as you want." "Thank you for your concern," Shams murmured. "But nothing happens outside of God's will. It is one of the rules. This world is erected upon the principle of reciprocity. Neither a drop of kindness nor a speck of evil will remain unreciprocated. Fear not the plots, deceptions, or tricks of other people. If somebody is setting a trap, remember, says God. He is the biggest plotter. Not even a leaf stirs outside God's knowledge. Simply and fully believe in that. Whatever God does, He does beautifully. Having said that, Shams gave me a wink and waved goodbye. I watched him thread his way rapidly through the muddy street in the direction of Rumi's house, despite my warnings. The killer Konya, March 1248 bastards. Idiots. I told them not to come with me. I explained to them that I always work alone and hate to see clients meddling in my affairs. But they insisted, reasoning that since the dervish had supernatural powers, they had to see him dead with their own eyes. All right, I conceded in the end. But make sure you don't get anywhere near me until everything is over. They agreed. There were 3 of them now. The 2 men I knew from the earlier meeting and a new guy who sounded just as young and tense as the others. They all had their faces wrapped in black scarves. As if I cared about discovering their identities. After midnight I was outside Rumi's house. I jumped over the stone wall into the courtyard and hid myself behind a bush. My clients had assured me that Shams of Tabriz had the habit of meditating in the courtyard every night, before or after performing his ablutions. All I had to do was wait. It was a windy night, unusually chilly for this time of the year. The sword felt heavy and cold in my palm, the 2 coral beads that embellished its handle rough under my fingers. Just in case, I had also brought with me a small sheathed dagger. There was a pale blue haze around the moon. A few nocturnal animals hooted and howled from afar. I caught the sweet whiff of roses in the wind buffeting the trees. Strangely, the smell made me uneasy. Even before I reached the house, I hadn't been in the best of moods. But now it was worse. As I stood there, wrapped by that overly sweet odor, I couldn't help but feel a strong urge to drop the entire plan and leave this spooky place at once. But I stayed, true to my word. I didn't know how much time had passed. My eyelids began to feel heavy, and I kept yawning despite myself. As the wind's fury intensified, for some reason unbeknownst to me my mind kept raking up memories, dark and vexing, of all the men I had killed. My apprehension surprised me. It usually didn't make me nervous to remember the past. Pensive and withdrawn, perhaps, even sullen from time to time, but never nervous. I whistled a few songs to boost my morale, and when that didn't help, I fixed my gaze on the back door of the house and whispered, "Come on, Shams. Don't make me wait here too long. Come out into the courtyard." No sound, no movement, nothing. All of a sudden, it began to rain. From where I stood, I could see over the slanted walls of the courtyard. Soon the downpour was so hard that the streets turned into rushing rivers and I was completely soaked. "Damn it," I said. Damn. I was considering giving up for the night when I heard a sharp sound over the clatter of rain on the roofs and roads. There was someone in the courtyard. It was Shams of Tabriz. Holding an oil lamp in his hand, he walked in my direction and stopped only a few steps away from the bush where I was hiding. "It is a lovely night, isn't it?" he asked. Scarcely able to contain my confusion, I gasped. Was there someone else next to him, or was he talking to himself? Did he know I was here? Could he possibly be aware of my presence? My mind was boiling with questions. Then another thought occurred to me. How could the lamp in his hand keep burning despite the mighty wind and the heavy rain? And as soon as this question crossed my mind, I felt a shiver down my spine. I remembered the rumors about Shams. He so excelled in black magic, people said, that he could turn anyone into a braying donkey or a blind bat by simply tying a piece of string from that person's clothes and uttering his evil incantations. Though I had never believed in such nonsense and wasn't going to start doing so now, as I stood watching the flame of Shams's lamp flicker under the heavy rain, I couldn't stay still, I was trembling so. Years ago I had a master in Tabriz, Shams said as he put the lamp on the ground, thus taking it out of my eyesight. He is the one who taught me there was a time for everything. It is one of the last rules. What rules was he talking about? What cryptic talk was this? I had to decide quickly whether I should come out of the bush now or wait until he turned his back to me, except he never did. If he knew I was here, there was no point in hiding. In case he didn't, though, I had to measure well when to come out. But then, as if to deepen my confusion, I noticed the silhouettes of the 3 men waiting under a covering outside the garden wall shift restlessly. They must have been wondering why I hadn't moved to kill the dervish. It is rule number 37, Shams continued. God is a meticulous clockmaker. So precise is his order that everything on earth happens in its own time. Neither a minute late nor a minute early. And for everyone without exception, the clock works accurately. For each there is a time to love and a time to die. In that moment I understood that he was talking to me. He knew I was here. He had known it even before he stepped out into the courtyard. My heart started to race. I felt as if all around me the air were being sucked away. There was no use in hiding anymore. And just like that, I stood up and walked out from behind the bush. The rain stopped as abruptly as it had started, plunging everything into silence. We stood face to face, the killer and the victim, and despite the strangeness of the situation everything seemed natural, almost peaceful. I pulled out my sword and swung it with all my might. The dervish dodged the blow with a swiftness I did not expect from a man of his size. I was about to swing again when suddenly a rush of movement swirled in the darkness and 6 men appeared out of nowhere, attacking the dervish with clubs and spears. Apparently the 3 young men had brought friends. The ensuing battle was so intense that they all toppled to the ground, rolling around, regaining footing, and falling again, breaking spear after spear into splinters. I stood watching, shocked and furious. Never before had I been reduced to playing witness to a murder I was paid to commit. I was so angry at the 3 young men for their insolence that I could easily have let the dervish go and fought them instead. But before long, one of the men started to yell hysterically. "Help! Help us, jackal head! He is going to kill us!" Fast as lightning I threw my sword aside, pulled my dagger out of my belt, and dashed forward. The 7 of us knocked the dervish to the ground, and in one swift move I stabbed him in the heart. A single hoarse cry came out of his mouth, his voice breaking at its peak. He didn't stir again, nor did he breathe. Together we lifted his body, which was strangely light, and dumped him into the well. Gasping loudly for air, we each then took a step back and waited to hear the sound of his body hitting the water. It never came. "What the hell is going on?" said one of the men. "Didn't he fall in?" "Of course he did," another said. "How could he not?" They were panicking. So was I. "Maybe he got caught on a hook on the wall," the third man suggested. The suggestion made sense. It took the burden of finding an explanation off our shoulders, and we gladly embraced it, though we all knew there were no hooks on the walls of wells. I don't know how long we waited there, avoiding one another's eyes. A cool breeze crossed the courtyard, sprinkling thin, brown willow leaves around our feet. High in the sky above, the dark blue of the morning was just beginning to break into violet. We might have stayed there until long into the day had the back door of the house not opened and a man walked out. I recognized him instantly. It was Maulana. "Where are you?" he yelled, his voice heavy with concern. "Are you there, Shams?" At the mention of his name, all 7 of us took to our heels. The 6 men jumped over the garden walls and disappeared into the night. I remained behind, searching for my dagger, which I found under a bush, covered with mud. I knew I should not linger there, not even a second, but I couldn't resist the temptation of looking back. And when I did, I saw Rumi stagger into the courtyard and then suddenly lurch to his left, toward the well, as if guided by an intuition. He leaned forward, peered down, and stood like that for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the semidarkness inside the well. Then he pulled back, fell to his knees, pounded his chest, and let out a terrifying scream. "They killed him. They killed my Shams." I jumped over the wall and, leaving behind the dagger with the blood of the dervish on it, ran as I had never run before. Ella, Northampton, August 12, 2008. Balmy and sunny. It was an ordinary day in August. A day like any other. Ella woke up early in the morning, prepared breakfast for her husband and children, watched them leave for work and chess and tennis clubs, went back to her kitchen, opened her cookbook, and chose the day's menu. Spinach soup with creamy mushroom mash, mussels with mustard mayonnaise, seared scallops with tarragon butter sauce, garden salad with cranberries, zucchini rice gratin, rhubarb and vanilla cream lattice pie. It took her all afternoon to cook the dishes. When she was done, she took out her best china. She set the table, folded the napkins, and arranged the flowers. She set the oven timer for 40 minutes, so that the gratin could be warm by 7 o'clock. She prepared the croutons, put the dressing in the salad, thick and fatty, just as Avi preferred. It occurred to her to light the candles, but she changed her mind upon second thought. It was better to leave the table like this. Like an immaculate picture. Untouched. Unmoving. Then she grabbed the suitcase she had earlier prepared and left her house. As she walked out, she murmured one of Shams's rules. It is never too late to ask yourself, am I ready to change the life I am living? Am I ready to change within? Even if a single day in your life is the same as the day before, it surely is a pity. At every moment and with each new breath, one should be renewed and renewed again. There is only one way to be born into a new life, to die before death. Aladdin Konya, April 1248. Blowing hot and cold, changing my mind every passing minute as to how I should behave toward others. 3 weeks after Shams's death, I finally mustered the courage to go and talk to my father. I found him in the library, sitting alone by the firelight, as still as an alabaster statue, shadows leaping across his face. "Father, can I talk to you?" I asked. Slowly, hazily, as if swimming back to the shore from a sea of reveries, he looked at me and said nothing. "Father, I know you think I have a role in Shams's death, but let me assure you." All of a sudden, my father raised his finger, interrupting my words. "Between you and me, son of mine, words have dried up. I have nothing to hear from you and nothing to tell you in return," he pronounced. "Please don't say that. Let me explain," I begged, my voice shaking. "I swear to God, it wasn't me. I know the people who did it, but it wasn't me." "My son," my father interjected again, the sorrow draining out of him, replaced by the chilling calmness of someone who has finally accepted a terrible truth. "You say it wasn't you, but there is blood on your hem." I flinched and instantly checked the ends of my robe. Could it be true? Was there blood on me from that evening? I inspected my hem, and then my sleeves, hands, and fingernails. It all seemed clean. When I raised my head again, I came eye to eye with my father and only then understood the little trap that he had set for me. By inadvertently checking my hem for blood, I had given myself away. It is true, I did join them in the tavern that evening. I am the one who told the killer that Shams had the habit of meditating every night in the courtyard. And later that night, when Shams was talking to his killer under the rain, I was one of the 6 men eavesdropping by the garden wall. And when we decided that we should attack, because there was no going back and the killer was taking things too slowly, I showed them the way into our courtyard. But that's it. I stopped there. I didn't take part in the fight. It was Baybars who attacked, and Ershad and others helped him. And when they panicked, Jackal Head did the rest. Later on, I lived that moment over and over in my mind so many times that it is hard to tell what part is real and what part a figment of my imagination. Once or twice I conjured a memory of Shams escaping from our hands into the pitch-black night, and the image was so vivid I almost believed it. Though he is gone, there are traces of him everywhere. Dance, poetry, music, and all the things that I thought would vanish once he was gone have stayed firmly planted in our lives. My father has become a poet. Shams was right. When one of the jars was broken, so was the other jar. My father had always been a loving man. He embraced people of all faiths. He was kind toward not only Muslims but also Christians, Jews, and even pagans. After Shams came into his life, his circle of love became so vast it included even the most fallen of society, prostitutes, drunks, and beggars, the scum of the scum. I believe he could even love Shams's killers. There was, and still is, only one person he could not manage to love, his son. Sultan Walid Konya, September 1248. Beggars, drunks, prostitutes, orphans, and thieves, he distributes all his gold and silver to criminals. Since that awful night, my father has never been the same. Everyone says he has lost his mind to grief. When asked what he is doing, he tells the story of Imrul Qais, the king of Arabs, who was very well liked, notoriously rich and handsome, but one day, unexpectedly, walked out of his perfect life. Qais put on dervish robes, gave up all his wealth, and from then on wandered from one landscape to another. This is what losing your beloved does to you, my father says. It dissolves your king self into dust and brings out your dervish self. Now that Shams is gone forever, I am gone, too. I am not a scholar or a preacher anymore. I am the embodiment of nothingness. Here is my Fana, herein my Bacca. The other day a ginger-haired merchant who looked like the worst liar on earth knocked on our door. He said he had known Shams of Tabriz way back from his years in Baghdad. Then, dropping his voice to a confidential whisper, he swore that Shams was alive and well, hiding and meditating in an ashram in India, waiting for the appropriate time to emerge. As he said all this, there wasn't a trace of honesty on his face. But my father got delirious. He asked the man what he wanted in return for this wonderful news. Without the least bit of shame, the merchant said that as a young boy he had always wanted to become a dervish, but since life had taken him in another direction, he would at least love to have the kaftan of a scholar as famous as Rumi. Upon hearing this, my father took out his velvet kaftan and handed it to him, just like that. But, father, why did you give your precious kaftan to that man when you knew so well that he was lying? I inquired as soon as the man was gone. And this is what my father said. You think a kaftan is too high a price to pay for his lie. But my dear son, imagine, if he were telling the truth, if Shams were really alive, I would have given my life. Rumi Konya, October 31, 1260. By and large over time, pain turns into grief, grief turns into silence, and silence turns into lonesomeness, as vast and bottomless as the dark oceans. Today is the 16th anniversary of the day Shams and I met in front of the Inn of Sugar Vendors. Every year on the last day of October, I retreat into a solitude that grows in weight day by day. I spend 40 days in Chilla, thinking of the 40 rules. I remember and review each of them, but there in the far reaches of my mind there is only Shams of Tabriz, glittering. You think you cannot live anymore. You think that the light of your soul has been put out and that you will stay in the dark forever. But when you are engulfed by such solid darkness, when you have both eyes closed to the world, a third eye opens in your heart. And only then do you come to realize that eyesight conflicts with inner knowledge. No eye sees so clear and sharp as the eye of love. After grief comes another season, another valley, another you. And the lover who is nowhere to be found, you start to see everywhere. You see him in the drop of water that falls into the ocean, in the high tide that follows the waxing of the moon, or in the morning wind that spreads its fresh smell. You see him in the geomancy symbols in the sand, in the tiny particles of rock glittering under the sun, in the smile of a newborn baby, or in your throbbing vein. How can you say Shams is gone when he is everywhere and in everything? Deep in the slow whirling of sorrow and longing, I am with Shams every day, every minute. My chest is a cave where Shams is resting. Just as a mountain keeps an echo inside itself, I hold the voice of Shams within. Of the scholar and preacher I once was, not even the smallest speck remains. Love has taken away all of my practices and habits. Instead it has filled me with poetry. And though I know that there are no words that can express this inner journey of mine, I believe in words. I am a believer of words. 2 people have helped me through my hardest days, my elder son and a saint named Saladin, the goldbeater. It was while listening to him work in his small store, beating leaves of gold to perfection, that I had the most wonderful inspiration to put the final touches to the dance of the whirling dervishes. The rhythm emanating from Saladin's store was the same as the pulse of the universe, the divine rhythm Shams had talked and cared so much about. In time my elder son married Saladin's daughter, Fatima. Bright and inquisitive, she reminded me of Kimya. I taught her the Quran. She became so dear to me that I started referring to her as my right eye and her sister Hidia as my left eye. That is the one thing dear Kimya proved to me long ago, that girls are just as good students as boys, if not even better. I arrange Sema sessions for women and advise Sufi sisters to continue this tradition. 4 years ago I began to recite the Mathnawi. The first line came to me one day at dawn apropos of nothing, while I was watching the sunlight slice the dark. Ever since then the poems spill out of my lips as if by a force of their own. I do not write them down. It was Saladin who painstakingly wrote out those early poems. And my son made copies of each. It is thanks to them that the poems survived, because the truth is, if asked to repeat any one of them today, I don't think I could. Prose or poetry, the words come to me in flocks and then leave just as suddenly, like migrating birds. I am only the bed of water where they stop and rest on their way to warmer lands. When I start a poem, I never know beforehand what I'm going to say. It could be long or it could be short. I don't plan it. And when the poem is over, I'm quiet again. I live in silence. And, silence, Khamush, is one of the two signatures I use in my ghazals. The other one is Shams of Tabriz. The world has been moving and changing at a speed we human beings can neither control nor comprehend. In 1258, Baghdad fell to the Mongols. The one city that prided itself on its fortitude and glamour and claimed to be the center of the world suffered defeat. That same year Saladin died. My dervishes and I had a huge celebration, passing through the streets with drums and flutes, dancing and singing in joy, because that is how a saint should be buried. In 1260 it was the Mongols' turn to lose. The Mamelukes of Egypt defeated them. Yesterday's victors became today's losers. Every winner is inclined to think he will be triumphant forever. Every loser tends to fear that he is going to be beaten forever. But both are wrong for the same reason. Everything changes except the face of God. After the death of Saladin, Husam the student, who has matured so fast and so well along the spiritual path that he is now called Husam Chelebi by everyone, helped me to write down the poems. He is the scribe to whom I dictated the entire Matnawi. Modest and generous, if anyone asks Husam who he is or what he does, without missing a beat he says, I am a humble follower of Shams of Tabriz. That's who I am. Little by little, one turns 40, 50, and 60 and, with each major decade, feels more complete. You need to keep walking, though there's no place to arrive at. The universe is turning, constantly and relentlessly, and so are the earth and the moon, but it is nothing other than a secret embedded within us human beings that makes it all move. With that knowledge we dervishes will dance our way through love and heartbreak even if no one understands what we are doing. We will dance in the middle of a brawl or a major war, all the same. We will dance in our hurt and grief, with joy and elation, alone and together, as slow and fast as the flow of water. We will dance in our blood. There is a perfect harmony and subtle balance in all that is and was in the universe. The dots change constantly and replace one another, but the circle remains intact. Rule number 39. While the parts change, the whole always remains the same. For every thief who departs this world, a new one is born. And every decent person who passes away is replaced by a new one. In this way not only does nothing remain the same but also nothing ever really changes. For every Sufi who dies, another is born somewhere. Our religion is the religion of love, and we are all connected in a chain of hearts. If and when one of the links is broken, another one is added elsewhere. For every Shams of Tabriz who has passed away, there will emerge a new one in a different age, under a different name. Names change, they come and go, but the essence remains the same. Ella Konya, September 7, 2009. By his bed she was sleeping on a plastic chair when she suddenly opened her eyes and listened to an unexpected sound. Somebody was saying unknown words in the dark. She realized it was the call to prayer coming from outside. A new day was about to begin. But she had a feeling it would also be the end of something. Ask anyone who has heard the call to morning prayer for the first time and he will tell you the same thing. That it is beautiful, rich, and mysterious. And yet at the same time there is something uncanny about it, almost eerie. Just like love, in the stillness of the night, it was to this sound that Ella woke with a start. She blinked repeatedly in the dark until she could make sense of the male voice filling the room from the open windows. It took her a full minute to remember that she was not in Massachusetts anymore. This wasn't the spacious house she had shared with her husband and 3 children. All that belonged to another time, a time so distant and vague that it felt like a fairy tale, not like her own past. No, she wasn't in Massachusetts. Instead she was in another part of the world altogether, in a hospital in the town of Konya in Turkey. And the man whose deep, steady breathing she now heard as an undertone to the call for the morning prayer was not her husband of 20 years but the lover for whom she had left him one sunny day last summer. Are you going to leave your husband for a man with no future? Her friends and neighbors had asked her again and again. And how about your kids? Do you think they will ever forgive you? And that is how Ella had come to understand that if there was anything worse in the eyes of society than a woman abandoning her husband for another man, it was a woman abandoning her future for the present moment. She switched on the table lamp and in its soft amber glow inspected the room, as if to make sure nothing had changed since she drifted off to sleep only a few hours ago. It was the smallest hospital room she had ever seen, not that she'd seen many hospital rooms in her life. The bed occupied most of the floor space. Everything else was placed in relation to the bed: a wooden closet, a square coffee table, an extra chair, an empty vase, a bed tray with pills of varying colors, and next to it the book Aziz had been reading since the beginning of this trip, Me and Rumi. They had come to Konya 4 days ago, spending the first days in the city being no different from the average tourists, visiting monuments, museums, and archaeological sites. Stuffing themselves with the local dishes, and taking pictures of every new thing, no matter how ordinary or silly. Everything was going well until the day before, when Aziz, while having lunch at a restaurant, collapsed on the floor and had to be rushed to the nearest hospital. Since then she'd been waiting here by his bedside, waiting without knowing what to expect, hoping against hope, and at the same time silently and desperately quarreling with God for taking back so soon the love he had given her so late in life. "My dear, are you sleeping?" Ella asked. It wasn't her intention to disturb him, but she needed him awake. There came no answer other than a fleeting lull in the rhythm of his breathing, a missing note in the sequence. "Are you awake?" she asked, whispering and raising her voice at the same time. "I am now," Aziz said slowly. "What is it? You couldn't sleep." "The morning prayer," Ella said, and paused as if that explained everything: his deteriorating health, her growing fear of losing him, and the absolute folly that love was, everything encapsulated by those 3 words. Aziz sat straight up now, his green eyes unblinking. Under the wispy light of the lamp and surrounded by bleached white sheets, his handsome face looked sadly pale, but there was also something powerful about it, even immortal. "The morning prayer is special," he murmured. "Did you know that of the 5 prayers a Muslim is supposed to perform every day, the one in the morning is said to be the most sacred but also the most testing? And why is that? I guess it's because it wakes us up from dreams, and we don't like that. We prefer to keep sleeping. That's why there is a line in the morning call that doesn't exist in the others. It says, 'Prayer is better than sleep.' But perhaps sleep is better for the 2 of us," Ella thought. If only we could fall asleep together. She longed for an easy, unperturbed slumber no less magical than Sleeping Beauty's 100 years of absolute numbness to ease this pain. In a little while, the call to prayer came to an end, its echoes drifting away on retreating waves. After the last note faded, the world felt strangely safe, but unbearably silent. It had been a year since they'd been together. 1 year of love and awareness. Most of the time, Aziz had been well enough to keep traveling with Ella, but in the past 2 weeks his health had deteriorated visibly. Ella watched him go back to sleep, his face serene and so very dear. Her mind filled with anxieties. She sighed deeply and walked out of the room. She passed through corridors where all the walls had been painted shades of green and entered wards where she saw patients, old and young, men and women, some recovering, others failing. She tried not to mind the inquisitive gaze of the people, but her blonde hair and blue eyes made her foreignness incandescent. She had never felt so out of place anywhere before. But then Ella had never been much of a traveler. A few minutes later, she was sitting by the water fountain in the hospital's small, pleasant garden. In the middle of the fountain, there was a statue of a little angel, and at the bottom of it a few silver coins shone, each bearing somebody's secret wish. She groped in her pockets for a coin but couldn't find anything there other than scribbled notes and half a granola bar. As her gaze fell upon the garden, she saw some pebbles ahead. Smooth, black, and shiny. She picked one of them up, closed her eyes, and tossed it into the fountain, her lips murmuring a wish she already knew would not be realized. The pebble hit the wall of the fountain and bounced aside, falling right into the lap of the stone angel. If Aziz were here, Ella thought, he would have seen it as a sign. When she walked back half an hour later, she found a doctor and a young, head-scarved nurse in the room and the bedsheet pulled over Aziz's head. He had passed away. Aziz was buried in Konya, following in the footsteps of his beloved Rumi. Ella took care of all the preparations, trying to plan every little detail but also trusting that God would help her with the ones she couldn't handle. First she arranged the spot where he would be buried, under a huge magnolia tree in an old Muslim cemetery. Then she found Sufi musicians who agreed to play the ney and sent an email to Aziz's friends everywhere, inviting them to the funeral. To her delight, quite a number of them were able to come, from as far away as Cape Town, St. Petersburg, Murshidabad, and Sao Paulo. Among them were photographers like him, as well as scholars, journalists, writers, dancers, sculptors, businessmen, farmers, housewives, and Aziz's adopted children. It was a warm, joyful ceremony, attended by people of all faiths. They celebrated his death, as they knew he would have wanted. Children played happily and unattended. A Mexican poet distributed pan de los muertos, and an old Scottish friend of Aziz's sprinkled rose petals on everyone, raining over them like confetti, each and every one a colorful testimony that death was not something to be afraid of. One of the locals, a hunched old Muslim man who watched the whole scene with a wide grin and gimlet eyes, said this must have been the craziest funeral Konya had ever witnessed, except for the funeral of Maulana centuries ago. 2 days after the funeral, finally alone, Ella wandered the city, watching the families walk past her, merchants in their shops, and street vendors eager to sell her something, anything. People stared at this American woman walking in their midst with her eyes swollen from crying. She was a complete stranger here, a complete stranger everywhere. Back in the hotel, before she checked out and headed to the airport, Ella took off her jacket and put on a fluffy, peach-colored Angora sweater. A color too meek and docile for a woman who's trying to be neither, she thought. Then she called Jeanette, who was the only one of her 3 children who had supported her in her decision to follow her heart. Orly and Avi were still not speaking to their mother. "Mom, how are you?" Jeanette asked, her voice full of warmth. Ella leaned forward into empty space and smiled as if her daughter were standing right across from her. Then she said in an almost inaudible voice, "Aziz is dead." "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry." There was a brief lull as they both contemplated what to say. It was Jeanette who broke the silence. "Mom, will you be coming home now?" Ella tipped her head in thought. In her daughter's question, she heard another unstated question. Would she be going back to Northampton to her husband and stopping the divorce process, which had already turned into a maze of mutual resentments and accusations? What was she going to do now? She didn't have any money, and she didn't have a job. But she could always give private lessons in English, work for a magazine, or who knows, be a good fiction editor one day. Closing her eyes for a moment, Ella prophesied to herself with jubilant conviction and confidence what the days ahead would bring her. She had never been on her own like this before, and yet, oddly enough, she didn't feel lonely. "I've missed you, baby," she said. "And I've missed your brother and sister, too. Will you come to see me?" "Of course I will, Mama, we will, but what are you going to do now?" "Are you sure you aren't coming back?" "I'm going to Amsterdam," Ella said. "They have incredibly cute little flats there, overlooking the canals. I can rent one of those. I'll need to improve my biking. I don't know. I'm not going to make plans, honey. I'm going to try living one day at a time. I'll see what my heart says. It is one of the rules, isn't it?" "What rules, Mom? What are you talking about?" Ella approached the window and looked at the sky, which was an amazing indigo in all directions. It swirled with an invisible speed of its own, dissolving into nothingness and encountering therein infinite possibilities, like a whirling dervish. "It's rule number 40, she said slowly. A life without love is of no account. Don't ask yourself what kind of love you should seek, spiritual or material, divine or mundane, Eastern or Western. Divisions only lead to more divisions. Love has no labels, no definitions. It is what it is, pure and simple. Love is the water of life. And a lover is a soul of fire. The universe turns differently when fire loves water.